Dream machine. DICOM, HL7-connected and snap. We're building the future, never looking back.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Imaging Informatics Unplugged. Today's guest is somebody a lot of you already know from the community side of things, even if you've never met him, Chris Hafey. Chris is a veteran medical imaging engineer with over 25 years in the industry. He's led development on products like the Stentor Eyesight PACS, Vital Images Vitria View, and Nucleus Health's cloud-based PACS. He also created Cornerstone JS, the open source library that now powers the OHIF Zero Footprint Viewer used by thousands of developers worldwide. He's also contributed to the DICOM web specification, and most recently, he was a principal solution architect at AWS. Back during the early days of COVID lockdown, while still working in the industry, Chris started an informal Monday morning meetup where people from across the imaging world, vendors, PACS, AI folks, could all talk shop with no marketing filter. And that meeting ran for a few years, and then it went on hiatus when Chris stepped away from AWS and he genuinely retired for about a year and a half. Then last December, he came out of retirement to start a new company, Merkulis. And he also started that community meetup again, too. So what pulled him back in is the part I really want you to hear. Chris has spent close to 6 years chasing a hard technical problem in healthcare data. How do you reliably synchronize medical imaging data across systems without losing integrity or blowing your performance budget? He built and sold imaging companies before, but this time coding solo with AI coding assistants, he cracked it in a way that changed his whole calculus about what a small team can build without raising tens of millions of dollars. The company he started is called Merkalis, named after the Merkle-tree data structure, the same idea underneath Git or blockchain, and his goal is nothing small: solve healthcare data management the way Git solved source control. So we get into all of that today. We talk about what it's like coding with Claude or other LLMs after 25 years of doing it by hand, what that means for junior engineers coming up in the field, and why he thinks some legacy PACS vendors might be better off rebuilding from scratch than fixing what they've got. Now, before we jump into the show, if you're working towards your imaging informatics credentials, your CIIP, you want to learn more about imaging informatics, check out nagelsconsulting.com. Keep an eye out for our upcoming DICOM training program with hands-on live imaging learning labs. And with all that said, let's jump into the episode. Thank you very much, Chris. To start things off, one of the things that I really enjoy, and it was a couple of years ago, you had started this community. I think it was Monday mornings or something like that. It might have been once a month. And it was a number of different people from across the community. So there was a variety of different vendors. I tried to go really light on, vendor specific conversations and so on, but really digging into like what problems people are finding. And you started that back up again. I wanted to maybe ask what motivated you to start it to begin with way back in the day, and then what went on a bit of a hiatus for a little while, and now you're recapturing this. Tell us a bit about kind of what has motivated you to bring us to that point.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll just start at the beginning. So I think this was during COVID. 2020 is when it started. And, I think, as you recall back then, we all started working from home during lockdown and whatnot. I thought, hey, it'd be kind of fun just to kind of meet with some of my colleagues on a regular basis and just chat about things. And so we kind of did that. And it kind of started growing just kind of organically. And then, completely unstructured. We figured out the agenda the day of. And, I have a pretty high value on kind of like unfiltered like truth. I think when it gets to vendors and marketing, things get really watered down. Like you can't go to anyone's website and find out really any interesting details, at least from a technical perspective, very rarely. And so this is just an open opportunity to kind of share. And it just became a place where, I think a lot of people came in and asked questions that I could answer and they benefit from it. And then they likewise came in and shared their expertise, whether it was in AI or, radiology PACS or whatever. And so I did that for quite a while until, I left AWS about 18 months ago, I basically retired. I kind of think on LinkedIn, I said I was going sabbatical, but it was really with an idea of retiring. I did that I was retired for a year and a half ago, and then just back in December, I decided to do a startup company. I'll talk, I guess, a little bit more about that. And while I was retired, I guess, I kept having people ask me like, hey, like, we missed that thing. Can you do it again? I'm like, well, I'm retired, so I'm not going to do that. I'm not really even programming or thinking about medical imaging anymore. But then when I started to do the startup, again, people started asking questions. I'm like, sure, why not? I'll do it. So I did start it back up just this year. I think January 12th or something was our first meeting, and we've got 3. And I think one thing that's a little bit different is because I'm in my own startup, I can be even less filtered than I was in the past. Like I worked for AWS and they had certain kind of guidelines on what we could and could not say. And so I have to kind of respect that, but I'm a little bit less filtered, I'd say. We're also recording the meetings and the transcripts are available. We'll post the videos at some point. I have to figure out the IT side on that. But yeah, I'm excited to be doing it again. And, I hope people can benefit from it again.
If my memory serves me correctly, the first version of this, the meetings were not recorded. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I think that was basically so I could speak a little bit more freely while being employed by AWS and other people. And I think the other thing too is like, I felt like other people would feel more comfortable to speak openly too. And I think they were, but the reality is that anyone can like log into these. Actually, people started logging in and recording them. They kind of ask like, well, I can't make all of them. Can I have my AI bot just log in and transcribe things? And I'm like, sure. And I think right now you can probably do it so easily, and AI transcribing bots are everywhere. I'm like, okay, let's not try and fight that. Let's just embrace it and let everyone know it's going to be recorded and we'll share it, So yeah, that's why we're here where we are.
Okay, so if people are listening to this and they wanted to join those meetings and just check them out, I can leave a link in the notes.
Absolutely.
What are some of the conversations that you said there's been 3 lately? So what kind of conversations were getting kicked around in the latest meeting?
Oh boy. So off the top of my head, there's probably 3 things. So one is a developer from China had developed this thing he called DICOM, and it's really like a kind of file format that encapsulates like a CT volume or a CT study, and it's designed for really fast access and that thing. I mean, a lot of times PACS vendors will build these types of things on their back end. And so I'm really interested because kind of what I'm working on right now, I'm like, oh, I need to do that or I need to build that. And so maybe I can use it. And so some really interesting discussions about that. And actually led to kind of like, okay, we have DICOM multi-frame. How is DICOM different than multi-frame? And so I gave my very opinionated feedback that multi-frame is kind of a hack and should never have existed. And, so we kind of talked about that. And so there's actually a lot of details. Like I share, like, this is exactly why I think this was a bad thing and we shouldn't have done it.
I highly recommend it. I'll be there joining very shortly.
Awesome.
Now on LinkedIn, you've been posting a lot about how you're a coder by trade. And so you've been talking a bit about how coding has taken a different place in your life with the use of using agentic LLMs and having assistants now, coding assistants that are helping you. Could you explain a little bit about that process? I'm interested to hear from your perspective going in. Did you have kind of a bit of a cynical mind going in, or were you quite open to what the possibilities were? And it sounds like it's really kind of blown away your expectations.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little story. So while I was at AWS, ChatGPT came out, and I think we're like, whoa! I think it kind of shocked the world, like what ChatGPT could do. And I think I heard people like starting to code with it, but I don't think there's like really good results initially. And you have like things like the GitHub, like Copilot, where you can go and like do code assist and these kind of things. And so I kind of tinkered around with some of that stuff, but like, not, I guess I was never really in a situation where I was building like a major thing. And so I'm like, I know how to code, and I don't really need this like to do like the things I was doing. So I didn't really mess with it too much. And then I retired, right? And like every once in a while, I kind of see people talking about using LLMs for coding. Specifically in 2025, we kind of definitely saw a ramp up, I think, like when Claude came out. And like I said, I was retired. I wasn't coding. When I was at AWS, I was like, I'm going to be leaving and retiring. I don't want to like learn a whole new AI thing. So I'm just going to, be done. But when I came up with this idea back this last fall, and I coded it the old school way by hand, the way I know. And I got to a point where like I had solved some kind of key problems. And I'm like, oh, this is actually going to work. This pretty new approach to things. I said, I wonder, I'm going to try this coding thing because like it took me, I don't know, like about a month to like get this core technology done. And I'm like, okay, it's really huge, this core technology, but like to build a whole PACS system or a whole anything, right, is like huge amount of work. And I'm like, I want to see like how fast I can get with this code assist stuff. And so I fired up Claude Sonnet 4.5. And it was pretty funny. I remember this. It was literally over about 4 or 5 days. I built like a full DICOM web server on top of like my core data platform engine. I integrated like OHIF with it. And I did it with like, so yeah, it was over 4 or 5 days, but the actual effort where I was thinking was somewhere around 2 hours time. So think about that. Like I built a full DICOM web server and integrated OHIF in like 2 hours of like real time, like my mind actually working on things. And my mind was actually blown away. I'm like, this technology I invented is pretty cool, but it's going to take like, I don't know, I have to raise like $50 million or something to commercialize it. I'm like, I don't need to do that now. Like I can actually do it with like 4 or 5 developers that know the domain and using LLMs. Like we can actually be as effective as like a 50-person dev team. I don't need $50 million to do this anymore. That's actually one of the main reasons why I started this startup, because I'm like, there's no way I want to go raise all this money and deal with all that stuff. It's like, we have a mission to completely, to actually, transform and revolutionize healthcare data management with our technology. And that's actually within reach with a small team without a lot of funding. And it's because of LLMs, and it's also because of timing and because of the people on our team. So yeah, like I still actually consider myself pretty much a newbie at this stuff. But really I've only been doing it for about 2 months, and I do it part-time. So I do a lot of other stuff. I really only code probably like, code about 2 days a week over the last, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks worth. And as I have done it, I've learned about how these things work and like what makes them work really well and like things I could do that mess it up. Right. And so kind of like I'm much more clear on it. And I can say like right now, if I sit down and code for 8 hours, I'll probably do about a month's worth of coding that I would normally do in that 8 hours with these LLMs. And I'm actually a fast coder. So like, I'm not like just a medium. Like I'm like, there's very few people I've seen that can code as fast as I can. And so you say I can fast coder and I'm 50 times, more productive or 20 times, whatever it is. It's really a significant thing. And I know some people have figured this out. And I think a lot of people are figuring it out, but it's the type of thing where it's completely changing the way products can be developed, and it's not going away. I mean, I think some people have probably tried it and gave up because they didn't see the benefits, but that's because they didn't try hard enough or long enough to figure out where it works well and where it doesn't.
It's interesting. It really is democratizing the playing field. I'm thinking of David and Goliath a little bit here. And I wonder, what do you predict as far as the Goliaths catching up or adapting to this? And I would imagine the way that they're going to adapt is identifying, we can accomplish, what we need to do with, like 10 people instead of 50 people. And, it results in job loss, which is one of the concerns that keeps echoing around whenever we talk about this. Where do you think that sits as far as the established organizations that might be kind of circling the can on this one?
I think like, so you're talking like the large, PACS vendors.
Yes.
The
big
there.
7 or whatever it is.
Yeah. I mean, so what I think is going on, and I don't have any actual data on this, is that there are developers at those big companies that have figured it out. They're like, wow, this is like really cool. And they've probably gone to management and say, we should really do things differently. And people are like, no, like the typical kind of management approach, like that's, too disruptive, too much of a risk. Like, a lot of these big companies are very risk averse. And so it's hard to change. And, honestly, I think they're already struggling probably with changing to the cloud, right? Like that's like a very disruptive thing for a lot of these large vendors, and they're trying to figure out how to do it. And then you add in like, let's blow up our whole development process and think about things differently. I suspect they're not getting a lot of traction. And I've heard, some of these bigger vendors have said, like we're using LLMs to automate our code review process. Okay, which is great. You spend, code review process is really important. You got to check for security, quality, all these kind of things. And you're bringing your, senior principal level engineers in, which are expensive. And they do these reviews. If you can actually remove them from that cycle by using LLM to reduce their time, they can actually do more important things. And so I think, like, I know stuff like that is happening. I don't think there's many people in a large, PACS vendor that are like, hey, let's do all coding with LLMs. Because I don't write code anymore. I do not. Everything I do is prompts into Claude and it does it. I still do a lot of time looking at the code and and it doesn't always get things right. I got to tell it like, oh, do it this way or make this change. But, I don't code anymore. There's no need to because it's faster and it does a better job than I ever did. But I think there are people are having a hard time. I think it's going to be slow. Probably I'm ahead of them. I don't know how much, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. But, at some point, I think like you're going to have to adopt this or you will lose to those that have. I think this is the year of like people either embracing it early on enough to stay relevant or disappearing in the next 3 years. So it's really getting caught too far behind.
Classic innovator's dilemma challenge here where, if I start shifting the tables around too much, it could disrupt my core business that I'm getting today at the cost of what my future might, the uncertainty of where the future may go.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm interested to get your thoughts on, and I've chatted with Woojin about this from the perspective of as a rad and the idea of skill degradation. And as we rely on these tools more, like we grew up with calculators, are generally speaking, the people within our generation may not have mental math like our parents may have, just because, the muscles may not be quite as strengthened as they were. And so as you lean on these tools more and more, is that a concern? And maybe, you're in a position where you're coming out of retirement to do this, but how about those that are, your junior to intermediate coders that are leaning on these tools heavily? Like, where do you see the balance on that?
So I have a real concern about basically us graybeards like me who've been around forever and know all this stuff, like retire and then all that knowledge is lost. Like, I think if you look at big tech, probably the PACS vendors, they're not hiring junior engineers anymore, or a lot less of them. I mean, AWS have just had some huge layoff like this week, right? I'm guessing that, I think part of that may be like they're getting benefits from AI. They don't need as many developers. I don't think a junior developer will, let me put it this way, like there's no need for junior developer. I gotta tell you straight up. It's like, and even a senior developer, like the LLM replaces both of those. There's like no reason for me to hire a junior senior level person. It's like, I took a product manager, some of those know how to code, and I showed them how to use Claude. It's like, they can write all the code. Like there's no reasonable requirements and, all that kind of stuff anymore. It's like, just go build it. It's like super easy. And so like, what you need is domain expertise. And what you need is like a good review cycle by, like principal level engineers that can go in and say, ooh, like it's trying to architecturally do this the wrong way. So I don't know how we're going to be replaced. Honestly, I think it's going to be a real problem. And if you look at like other trades, it's like they organize, unions and that kind of thing. Like that might need to kind of happen so that we can keep new blood coming in. Because right now, I don't think AI can replace that seasoned domain expert or seasoned architect, / principal engineer yet. Will it someday? Maybe, probably, but, it's a big mystery about like, how is this going to actually, what's software development going to look like in 5 years? Like, I don't know. It's going to be different, but, and I think what we're doing right now is not what we're doing in 5 years. I'm pretty sure about that.
It is amazing. I know how to code, but I would never call myself a coder, and I wouldn't ever want to be assigned to develop a polished product. But what I've been able to do with LLMs is incredible. Within a half an hour's time, and you can get something spun up exactly what you're saying. It's just, it's understanding like how the adaptation to these new tools are going to work as far as supplementing and making sure like we still need certain level of qualified human beings around to be able to understand the core concepts of what we're trying to accomplish. I think sometimes it goes beyond understanding like maybe, the language of the code, but understanding also the workflow of what we're trying to accomplish. And some of those fundamentals, problem facing all domains where a high degree of experience is leaving the field with the baby boomers getting ready to retire and retiring right now. And trying to supplement that in a way that we can get younger people up to speed is the big challenge, I guess.
Yeah. It's really hard to imagine. I mean, I do think I could see, I guess I put a warning out to business people. It's like, before, I think business people kind of ran things and engineers were out there in the backyard doing the coding. I think there's going to be a little bit of a flip. I mean, I think engineers, like our company is completely engineering driven. We only hire engineers and everyone writes code and, that kind of thing. It's like, we don't need as many business people. It's like, we need are people that like know the domain and can like generate code. And yeah, and we do business stuff on the side, but like the pure business person, like, I think they're going to really struggle. It's like, they're going to have to adapt into like adding value at the product level, not just, not being one level removed and just being strong with an MBA. And so I think you're going to see a lot of, I think people that are principal engineers in this space have been coding, medical imaging for 25 years will likely leave wherever employer they are and start their own business because they can build whole products themselves. They can launch it, and so I think you're going to see a big change there. I even think about, we kind of go back to the big PACS vendors. It's like, I heard some statistic today. They spend 70% of their R&D budget on break fixes. LLMs don't necessarily help with that. In fact, they probably aren't great because there's too much context for them to understand to fix a bug in a very legacy code-based system. So, and so they're not doing a lot of innovation. And innovation is where you're like actually generating new features, building new product. That's where the LLMs I know work because that's what I'm doing. And so it's like, I think like at some point, I think I posted this on LinkedIn the other day, but it's like, it's actually going to be faster for a major PACS company to build a new PACS from scratch than fix the one they've had for 30 years that's so full of technical debt. It's like, that's a real possibility, I think, in the next 12 months. I think if they started latching on to that, they'd be better off than like trying to keep this old legacy thing alive because they can do it because you can do it now.
That's an interesting point. I think I missed that post, but yeah, that's compelling thought to think about. It'll be interesting to see over the next half decade to a decade where the landscape lands. I'm interested to hear a little bit more about the innovation. So I'm picturing you in this, retired life, maybe sitting by the lake. What draws you back in? What was it that, like you felt the inspiration of an idea, I assume, or someone came to you and told you something? And so could you share a bit about what led you to just get started with getting back in the game? And then I'd like to hear a little bit about the innovation that you're looking at here.
Well, it's kind of a funny story. So like I have a good friend, Pantelis. He lives in Greece and he was getting married this last fall. So he invited me out to his wedding. And so I went there and I remember he's like, and everyone asks me all the time, like, hey, are you going to unretire? I'm like, no, I hope not. Like I like not having to work. And I said, but if I do, it's going to be for something pretty darn important because like, it's like something that's only going to, I have to do it because no one else will, right? So that was kind of like what I was telling people. And when I was there, I met him and his family, and I was just really amazed. Like his whole family just embraced me like I was part of their family. I think part of the reason is that, Pantelis he grew up in Greece. So his family is like, he was working for some Greek medical imaging company. And, I took a chance on employing him while I was at Nucleus Health. And it completely changed his life, like his economic status raised up, and his quality of life, like, he loved what he was doing. He's actually gone off to like create open source projects for DICOM DIMSY using JavaScript, it's just completely changed his life. And I really kind of walked away from that saying like, wow, I'm in retired mode. Like, what can I do that is actually, important? And I'm like, if I can actually find people like that and elevate their economic and social status by taking a chance on them, I'm like, that's a good thing to do. And so I kind of left that, and Pantelis like, hey, let's go build something together. I'm like, yeah, whatever. But I came back home saying, okay, I should really think about like, how can I, help others and advance their economic status and whatnot. And we need new leaders in this industry, right? Like that's like going out, it's like someone needs to take my place in other people's places. And it just so happens that there is this technology problem I'm working on for the last 6 years. And I've not solved it yet. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to try and solve this. And it's so funny. Like I didn't program for literally a year, which I haven't done my whole life. I started programming like I was 8 years old. I've never gone that long without programming. And I remember like pulling out VS Code and like saying, okay, I'm going to start working. And like my brain just did like nothing was flowing. It's like it just stopped. It forgotten how to write code. And I even wasted a bunch of time like building different computer systems and servers, like just trying to like, I don't know, get my mind back in space. But eventually something clicked. I started coding and I solved this problem. And just to kind of give you a little more detail about it, you've probably seen like I'm a big blockchain fan and cryptocurrency and all that kind of stuff. Underneath blockchains is this thing called a Merkle-tree or Merkle-dag. And it's basically a cryptographic hash directed acyclic graph. And so think about, a graph, you have a patient with multiple studies and multiple series. It's a graph-like structure. And so Merkle-dag is the same thing. It's a graph, but they use cryptographic hashes to basically kind of ensure the integrity of the graph. And things like Git, the source control system, use it, blockchain uses it, ZFS, a file system. And in their respective areas, Git, blockchain, ZFS, they're like they blew away all the competition, right? There is, blockchains making huge, or cryptocurrencies making huge inroads on the financial side. Git has pretty much replaced all the source control systems. ZFS is generally considered like one of the best, if not the best, enterprise file system. And the reason is because Merkle-trees underneath. And so I'm like, I want to apply it to healthcare. It makes sense. Like a lot of the values that you see in Merkle-trees would benefit healthcare. But there's a big problem, right? So in healthcare, we actually have to permanently delete data. And you can't do that with a blockchain. In fact, that completely goes against it. And even Merkle-trees, you can't like delete stuff. And you have to be able to delete to meet GDPR, right to be forgotten, medical legal requirements, right? That's one thing. And the other thing is performance. Blockchains aren't all that scalable. And so like, how do you make something that can handle 10 million exams a year, right? In DICOM terms or medical imaging terms. And so I had to solve those two problems, and I did. And and that's kind of where, basically our core technology is, some of the key things here is that, you can have essentially infinite scalability. And if you look at every PACS or VNA system, they tend to have, I would actually argue all of them, none of them are infinitely scalable. They have some ceiling that's kind of around their, target customer base. If you're trying to sell into a large IDN, it's going to be higher than someone that's selling into community hospitals. But they all have some kind of upper limit. And I personally have built several systems where the upper limit gets hit because we underestimated what type of procedure growth would happen or the size of studies, et cetera. And so the system we built is basically doesn't have that problem. It will scale up. And in fact, our performance test goal here is to ingest 1 million DICOM studies, or about a petabyte data in 1 minute, which if you think about that, like no one can even come close to that. And that's way beyond what, anyone I think would probably ever really need. But it's just some big numbers I pull in the air because like, if we could do it, like it'd be pretty amazing. I think people would take notice. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. Just to show you, like I said, a very key part about it is extremely scalable, and a lot of other things too that come with kind of like a Merkle-tree as well.
So in one of your posts that caught my attention was around synchronization between different DICOM nodes. In Canada here, we have large imaging health information exchanges that allow hospitals and clinics to be able to share with each other. One of the challenges with that is you bring that in to your environment, and how do you know that you're referencing data that's parity with the source of truth if something's been removed? And IOCM will handle and propagate changes up until a certain point, but there is always this concern of, is there data parity? Am I looking at something that truly is accurate? And it sounds like that's the path, like based on that post and what you've just described, that is one of the core areas that you're trying to attack here. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, in fact, that's probably, I thought about this technology. It's really good at synchronizing things accurately, right? And that's a huge problem that we have in medical imaging, right? Mainly because DIMC's kind of brain dead protocols. Like, how do you know if you have all the images for study? Well, you don't, because there's no way to know how big a study is, because it can change. Like lots of stuff like that makes it really hard. And if you change something like the patient name, well, what do? You send the whole study again. And it's just very expensive and costly and slow and all these kind of things. So if you take, Merkle-trees, and I think the best way, especially for the people that are more technical here, which I think probably a lot of your audience is, if you look at Git, the source control system, many of us use that day in and day out, and it uses Merkle-trees underneath. I think we can use that for an example of a really good synchronization model. If you go to some big repository, a source code repository, and you clone it, the first time you clone it, it's a big download, right? Because there's all this history, all this stuff it pulls down. But then after that, anytime you want to get updates from other developers pushing it, it's very, very, very fast. It just pulls down basically the deltas. And so, if you kind of think about that, go, well, how do we apply that to medical imaging? If I download a full study, that's like the initial Git clone. Yeah, it's a lot of data because it has to go from point A to point B. But then once you have that data, the delta should be pretty small. It should be like a patient name update, or maybe they add an instance or something like that, like a structure report or secondary capture from an AI, whatever it may be. If we had a Git-like model for DICOM, I would only have to send the deltas out, and that would actually make things way easier to sync. Because it's got a cryptographic hash, it's Merkle-tree, you know that there's no tampering of the data because you recalculate the hash on the graph, and you can say, this part of the graph changed or whatever. So, you can be with 100% certainty that when I replicate from point A to point B, it's exactly the same thing. There's no difference, no tag morphing, no lost images, no nothing. You can know for sure that if this is the full representation of the study, on origin, now on the destination, you have it. And I think people, especially developers, go, well, of course, because I've used Git long enough that I've never run in a situation where I was in an inconsistent state. If I do a Git pull, and as long as I don't have any conflicts, it's I know I have the exact same thing as my colleague who also did a Git pull on the same repo. And so from that point of view, you can see how applying Git-like technology to DICOM would be hugely beneficial. And I'm not the first one with this idea. I'm sure people have thought about it. But what's different about what our tech does is that we don't synchronize at the file level. We go inside the DICOM and deconstruct it into individual nodes in the graph, and are able to replicate at a smaller, more granular level than the full DICOM file. So for example, if you take a DICOM file, you have the patient module, you have the study module, series module, instance module. If I deconstruct that single DICOM file into each of those modules, and I change the patient name, all I need to do is replicate 50 bytes, right? The patient name. I have to do the whole DICOM instance. And so that's the approach we take. We take DICOM, we deconstruct it into individual pieces. Those individual pieces can change and mutate, and we can replicate them very fast and very efficiently without having to send a whole study or even a whole instance over.
That's very incredible. Obviously, I mentioned the use case here in Canada where we're sharing data, and there are reports that we ran historically, and you could see that there was a big discrepancy between what a site would have locally and what they had, published to the archive. One of the other areas that you mentioned in a previous post, and maybe this is what led you to kind of go down this path, is I think we're seeing this a lot more now that we have AI models that are now downstream recipients of this data, and they need to be making sure that they're in sync. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. And in fact, when I was first tinkering with this and I kind of figured out how to do it, I'm AI vendors are probably, if I was going to productize this, I'd probably go talk to them because, every AI vendor I talk to says, we're really good at building AI models, but it's really hard to deploy on because we have to deal with getting the DICOM from the PACS and then, taking our AI results, which are really, detailed into some very kind of dumbed down format, like a secondary capture, because that's the least common denominator. And so there's a lot, and then you have to talk about, well, how do we scale out our AI algorithm processing? It's how do we know we have a full study? All these things that I would say typical AI companies that are really good data scientists and maybe have really good clinical knowledge don't have the healthcare IT infrastructure knowledge to, build all these things. I'm going to go help them and they'll like it. And this was kind of my original thought. And so that's what I was originally thinking about. Maybe I can sync one VNA to another. Maybe I can sync, on-premise to cloud. All these things could be done with this technology. And it's all things that we're looking at doing actually.
And where do you think you would be at now if you were doing this without the assistant of coding assistants and LLMs, and you still had the same vision? You were, going down this path, and I'm interested in kind of a time comparison.
I wouldn't do the startup if there wasn't LLMs.
Really?
Yeah, 100% I wouldn't, because I don't know, I love to code, and I still have a huge heart and passion for this industry and want to see it be better. But honestly, I'm just tired of the traditional business stuff. It's you got VCs or PE firms are investing in you and they want ROI in 4 years or less. And it's just a lot of pressure. And healthcare doesn't go that fast. Healthcare starts one of the hardest things in the traditional model because you cannot get it's very rare to get a good enough ROI on the time frame a VC firm wants. And so what that ends up doing is you get diluted down, you got to raise more money. It takes forever. And so I am not interested in that. It's if I'm going to go back and do this, I'm going to do it in a way where I can generate a lot of value with my time and not spending my time doing things that, are historically necessary, but things I don't enjoy doing at all. So I wouldn't be doing this unless there was LLMs. I felt like I could actually be doing what I like to do the best and the most of the time.
It is interesting because it almost seems as though there's a tier of a certain size company, and that's the traditional model. You raise money, you have a particular valuation, it seems in many cases, and that you're hoping to get bought out likely by a bigger player, and then it's the end of innovation at that point.
Right.
But when you have this tier of companies and they are evaluated so high that I don't know who is a player that can come in and buy them at this point as well. And it's an interesting kind of dynamic here where we'll see that unfold over the next little while as well.
Yeah, and actually, it'll take a little bit to explain what we're doing too. So, like, I've done this enough times to realize that to do really, transformative, disruptive things in healthcare requires a pretty long runway. It's like you can't think about things in a typical VC cycle if you really want to change industry. And like I said before, like I wouldn't come out of retirement unless I felt I could do something significant. And, just to kind of give you a little bit of light what we're doing. So what we're trying to do, so the company name that we formed is called Merkulis, and it's based on Merkle trees, right? So that's why we got Merkulis. And what we want to do is we want to solve the healthcare data management problem. If you look at a typical hospital or health system, there's 1,000+ different systems that are all connected via like DICOM and HL7, probably DIBC and HL7 version 2. If we're lucky, it's Fire and DICOM Web, but typically it's those other protocols. And each of those systems has a different operating system requirements, different database, different like all sorts of security issues because they're all different. And they all have like copies of a lot of data. Each one has a copy of the patient record. They know the patient name, date of birth, all these kind of things. Probably a little bit different in each system because they kind of tweak things. They have user accounts, roles, audit logs, all this kind of stuff. And if I think about it from a provider perspective, it's like the amount of money to maintain all of those systems, keep them connected, the data flowing, upgraded, on a reasonable time frame to deal with security vulnerabilities, test out all the integrations to heavily integrate. It's like the cost is just immense. And honestly, from an engineering point of view, it's brain dead. It's like we can do much better and we need to do much better. And we've been making progress with like on the standard side with like DICOM Web and Fire, which allows you to like, query things as opposed to having everything be stolen forward. But there's a lot of opportunity to do even better than that, especially on the performance and scalability point of view. Standards are really good at interoperability, but it's hard to build a system that scales to, the larger customer type needs on a pure standards-based system. You might be able to do, but it's going to be expensive. It's not going to be cost effective. And as we know, cost is a major issue for every healthcare provider everywhere. And so, you need to be able to come in and save people money. That's why I tell people, it's like, you can have the best product in the world, but if you don't actually save people money and probably generate them more revenue, like there's no market for your product. So it's like, you have to be able to save people money. And so our kind of vision in 10 years, to say this, is that we want half of the world's healthcare data stored in our platform in 10 years. That's our goal. And we think we have the technology to do it. We think now is the right time because our technology saves everyone tons of money and it opens up new revenue channels for everyone. This is both providers as well as vendors, right? So, on the vendor side, we can bring in new capabilities that they don't have that they desperately need, like having a hybrid on-prem cloud type PACS that automatically fails over if you lose connectivity to the cloud or vice versa. You can do multi-cloud with our software. You can do multi-data center. These are features that PACS vendors desperately need because most of their customers are on-prem. They all want to go to the cloud, but they're a little scared because we had a big cloud outage back in November. You remember?
Oh, yes.
Was down for, a day or 8 hours. And shortly after that, Microsoft went down and Cloudflare. And I think what we heard in RSNA is that providers we like the cloud, but we can't be down for 8 hours. So we need something. Really the best thing that most PACS vendors can do is, we'll have another PACS deployment on-prem that you can push to if the cloud goes down. But that's really not business continuity.
No, absolutely not.
And what happens if your radiologists are remote, which most of them are now? I can have a VPN to get into the on-premise system. It's a mess, right? And so I think our solution very elegantly solves it. And it solves it the same way GitHub does. If you think about GitHub, you have like thousands of repositories and all these users pushing and pulling, and everything stays in sync. So our system works very similar to like GitHub, or we like to call it Git for healthcare. But that's our vision. Like we want to solve the healthcare data management platform, and we want all the vendors to build on our stuff. And I think like that is a pretty audacious goal. And I think most people are probably going to hear it go, there's no way they can pull that off. But I think we can, because I think our technology is compelling. I think with LLMs, we can do it. We can deliver it in a way that saves everyone money. And you know what? The team I put together, it's like, that's what we want to do. And so we're going to try our best to get there.
I like audacious goals. I think that's the way to go. So maybe if people are listening to this, right now, for disclosure, it's January the 30th. We're going to release this towards May. So maybe there'll be updates that it will not be in sync with this episode. If people want to get a hold of you, want to learn more about this, I'll include your LinkedIn in the notes, but where will you be? I think you're going to be going to SIM in June.
Yeah, I'll be at SIM. Just hit me up on LinkedIn. It's like, we'll talk and figure out something. But yeah, that's probably the best way. We'll have our website up by then. We still don't have it up. But Merkalis.io, you could probably go in that way. But SIM would be a great place. I think like, who would actually reach out to me? Like our customers are ISVs or vendors, right? Like we're not selling to providers. We want to make ISVs bring products to market quicker. We want to reduce their costs in terms of, a deployment. So like reduce their cost of goods. So if you are building software, if you're greenfield, if you have an existing product that you need to modernize to be cloud and web friendly, if you like have a PACS solution and you want to go hybrid on-prem cloud or multi-clouds, like those are all good things to come talk to us about that we can help with.
This sounds terrific. Okay, well, thank you. I think that's a good way to end this off. I thank you very much, Chris. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Sure thing. Thank you, Jason.